أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب وله وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حتاما وفي الآخرة عذاب شديد ومغفرة من الله ورضوان وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور. صدق الله العلي العظيم. And know that this worldly life is nothing more than play and decoration and showing off and pride between one another and increasing in wealth and offspring. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the likeness of a strong rain that comes down and allows the green plants to rise. And then these green plants wither and they become yellow and they turn back unto dust. He says that the disbelievers are pleased by this, however, eventually it will lead to them having a strong chastisement and for others to gain the pleasure of Allah and the great reward. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. That when we talk about the topic of this worldly life, the worldly life is the bane or part of the difficulties that we have to overcome in order to attain the happiness that we want. That in this life, in the pursuit of this happiness that we want, and as we mentioned what the happiness was obviously this relationship or connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the major obstacles that stands in our way is the worldly life. And in fact, the Ahl al-Bayt have mentioned that the dunya or hayat al-dunya ra'su kulli khati'ah, that the worldly life is the head or the spout of every wrongdoing, of every bad thing. Love of this world, hubb al-dunya, sorry. Love of this world is the head or spout of every bad thing that happens in this worldly life. So they give us a warning about this worldly life, but what are the things within this worldly life that make it so difficult for us to attain this happiness, that make it difficult for us to attain this salvation? There's many factors, and inshallah we'll speak about a few of the factors. However, it all gets placed under the one banner or the one heading of the worldly life. One of the core factors is money. Whenever I say the word money, I remember Mr. Krabs. That one of the main things is money. That people love this money. And wealth is something, especially for the believer, there's many factors. But for the believer, the Holy Prophet ﷺ says the believer's money has the same sanctity as his blood. بِحُرْمَةِ دَمِهِ. That the money of the believer has the sanctity. Why? Because the believer strives hard to get halal money. To get money, legitimate money. Money in the right way. That he works hard to get it, what we commonly refer to as an honest dollar. However, money in general, the whole concept of money, if you look historically, and obviously in 5 minutes that I'm going to speak about the world economy, or in 60 seconds I'm not going to unravel the secrets of the economy of the world. However, simply put, that there was a time where people had objects and items and would barter and trade these objects and items. But the more they accumulated, they needed an easier way to give value to all of these items that they had. So in other words, if I have 100 sheep, I can't carry the 100 sheep with me, but I can carry a credit card with me, for example. Or I can carry a bullion of gold, which is the value of 100 sheep. Back then, this was what all the wealth was about. If you had one sheep, you were probably rich. Or one calf, or one camel. Anyhow, so ultimately, we get to the invention of money. Money being in the form of a gold coin or a silver coin. Or as it's referred to by the Ahl al-Bayt, hajrun mamsukh. That it's a rock that has been transformed, physically transformed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have this appearance. Truly, this is all it is. It's an element that carries certain properties that makes it shiny, and it's rare, and it has a higher value. So the point of the matter is that when people invented these coins, or dananir, they say that Iblis saw these coins, and when he saw them drop, he was so happy that he grabbed them and placed them on his eyes. We have a tradition. And then he placed them on his chest and started hugging them. And he said, I'm so happy that this thing has been invented, because this is the thing that I will use to deceive the son of Adam. I can really deceive the son of Adam with this thing, with this object, with this item that has the imagined value of what it is. And today we realize that back then it was a gold coin or silver coin or whatever it was. But now it's gone from coin to paper, or cotton paper hybrid, as we see in the American currency, or even PVC plastic as we see in the Australian currency. The point of the matter, it no longer has that backing that it used to have. And it rises and falls with speculation, etc., etc. So in other words, the clarity of the deception of the currency has become much more clear. That we can see how deceptive the whole point of currency is. However, we currently live in this way and system of life. It's not, I'm not sitting here and saying, let's go back to the barter system. But the issue is, let us have a look at how deceptive this whole concept is. The concept of this money. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says to Abu Dhar, he says, يا أبا ذر إن الله تبارك وتعالى لم يوحى إلي أن أجمع المال ولكن أوحي إلي أن سبح بحمد ربك وكن من الساجدين واعبد ربك حتى يأتيك اليقين. That he says, Ya Abu Dhar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't reveal unto me to accumulate wealth. On the contrary, he told me that to remember, do remembrance, tasbih, and sujood, and to worship, prostration, and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until I reach the time of my parting from this world. That these are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded me with. Furthermore, he says, Ya Abu Dhar, he says, Al-mal wa sharaf adhab lidin al-rajul من ذئبين ضاريين في زرب الغنم فأغار فيها حتى أصبح فماذا أبقى منها. That he says to him, that, O Abu Dhar, love of this world and love of sharaf. Now, sharaf is another concept altogether. We're not going to speak about tonight. However, the sharaf in general is that people that love to have a status among men. And this is huge. This is a big one. For us to sit there and feel that we are entitled to some sort of status that we don't have, or we're not worthy of. But we want everybody to love us and everybody to see us in that. As humans, we have this need. However, for us to think we have some sort of entitlement to this is something that deviates us away from the correct path. But inshallah, we'll go into detail with this when we talk about arrogance and humility. Back to the first one, he says al-mal, or the wealth. He says the wealth is like, and this the mankind's love of wealth and mankind's love of being honorable, okay, i.e. honorable in the eyes of the people. Because the good sharaf and the good honor is honorable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But unfortunately, being honorable in the eyes of Allah isn't always honorable amongst the people. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there's a hadith of Ahl al-Bayt that al-tafakhur, or for somebody to be proud. He says, Al-tafakhur ba'd al-'ard 'ala Allah, or yawm al-qiyamah. This is when the pride is. If you want to be proud, it's not pride today. Don't be proud today. But do the action so on the day of judgment, you can be proud. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is my righteous servant who has the right to be proud. However, in this world, if we are proud of things that are fleeting, this is incorrect. So he says that love of this wealth and love of this sharaf is like two wolves that are stuck in a pen with a sheep. Imagine two wolves, two ravenous wolves stuck in a pen, so it's an enclosed area with a sheep. He says, if you leave these two, what will remain of the sheep in the morning? الناس نيام وإذا ماتوا انتبهوا. That it's like that. That if you love this wealth in this world, love it to that degree, it's like that. That it's like having these two ravenous wolves, and the sheep is the example of your faith. And that they're eating away at it, what would be left if you left them for one night? Nothing will remain of it if you leave it for one night. And this is why the example of that other tradition, that people are asleep, and then when they wake up, imagine this happened overnight, and you wake up and you say, where's the sheep? There obviously won't be a single part or piece of the sheep that remains. This is the same effect, whereas if we sit there and think our goal in life is just to accumulate wealth. Many other traditions, there was a tradition at the time of Banu Israel, one of the tribes of Banu Israel was going through a strong famine. There was a famine, there was no food, there was nothing for them to eat. So what they began to do is they ate everything that was on the ground. After there was nothing left, no rain was coming down, etc., etc., they became so hungry that some of them deviated so badly they started digging up graves and getting what's left of the fresh bodies and eating that because of the necessity. Anyway, so they started digging up graves until they got to a grave which was the grave of a prophet, of one of the prophets. And so they uncover the grave, and above the body of the prophet is a tablet. And on the tablet was written that there will come a time where people from this tribe will uncover my grave. So he knew that this was going to happen, so he had them engrave this tablet on his grave. And on the top, he says, there was a small narration, he says, مَا قَدَّمْنَا وَجَدْنَا, that whatever we have put forward, we've seen. So in other words, whatever you spend in the path of Allah, you will see in the next world. He says, وَمَا أَكَلْنَاهُ رَبَحْنَا, that whatever we have eaten, it was our victory, we gained it. He goes, وَمَا تَرَكْنَاهُ خَسَرْنَا, that whatever we have left behind, we have lost. That this was a message to these people specifically about this wealth. These people that were going through famine, to stop them at that point to not go forward and desecrate the body of this prophet. However, one of the core issues we have to look at, because everybody loves money, that's the truth, that we do have this love of wealth, we have this love of being rich, so we have this love of being known. These two go hand in hand. This is why the Holy Prophet puts it together as the mal and the sharaf, that we have this love. And in fact, you know, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but if you look at the opinion of psychologists on why, for example, people buy flashy cars and flashier cars, or why people buy a phone and then a flashier phone and then an even flashier phone. It doesn't matter if they release 3 iPhones in a year, you need to get the latest one. You know, really, if you look at it on paper, what was the difference between the 3G and the 3GS? Not much. However, people have to buy it. What was the difference between the Galaxy 3 and the Galaxy 4, for example? But you have to go ahead and buy it. You know, these small features, I was just imagining when, you know, some of the features on these phones, the one where you scroll with your eyes. I could imagine like a, you know, Lebanese father-son sitting there and the father says, you know, look this thing up for me, so the son starts mucking around with his eyes. You know what's going to happen next. Probably give him a slap and say, what are you doing? Type it in. You know, get it done. Anyway. So, like I didn't go into marketing. The point of the matter is that people feel that they need to get this new object, that this object will give me happiness, that this object will make me loved among my people, that this object will give me happiness among my people. This is one of the core problems. In fact, Imam Rida alayhi salam says there's 5 reasons why people accumulate wealth, or how people can accumulate much wealth. He says, بِالْبُخْلِ الشَّدِيدِ, by being very and extremely miserly. He says, وَأَمَلَ الطَّوِيلِ, this is very important, keep this in our heads, by having hope that, you know, there's going to be some sort of fruit at the end of it. وَحَرْصٌ غَالِبٌ, that they're afraid of losing any of the wealth. Usually if someone feels like the source has been cut off, then they feel whatever I have I must keep. This is the difference between a generous person and a miserly person. The generous person knows that as much as I give, this has come from the treasury of Allah, and the treasury of Allah is never going to run out. However, the one that feels like, hold on, I've got this much now, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might stop giving me for some reason, so I better hold on to it. And he says, وَقَطِيعَةُ الرَّحْمِ, this is why Salat al-Rahim is so important, because it's true, when we meet with our families and our relatives, it's Shahr Ramadan, and this is off topic, I don't want to go too far into it, but Shahr Ramadan is all about meeting with the family, eating together, being together on the table, inviting friends and family. You get back together, that all of a sudden you feel we can put all of this aside, let's go and eat together, let's be friends together again, let's forgive each other, etc., etc. And it's very important. However, when you meet back with your families and relatives, what happens? Your cousin knows you're an electrician, so he wants you to come and do this. Your uncle knows you're a mechanic, he wants you to come and, you know, change a tyre. Even though you know his son can change a tyre, but he wants you to change the tyre. So you get upset and you say, you know what, I'm not going to call him, I'm going to avoid him. You know, the other cousin owes you $20, so, you know, he avoids you because he doesn't want to give you the $20 back, etc., etc. So all of these problems come into play, and you feel like, oh, this is why you want to be away. This is part of wealth, accumulation of wealth. That you feel, why should I put my time into this when I could be getting paid for it? Why should I do a love job for my cousin when I could, for example? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us on this earth for this purpose, to help each other. The best of deeds is to help each other. Naf' al-ikhwan is the best of deeds in some traditions. The point of the matter that these are of the best and most important deeds to help one another, especially the blood relations, to visit the blood relations. That's the whole point, you're there. If someone comes and asks you for help in something, whatever it is, filling a form, making a phone call, this means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you. He's given you a blessing. And this is why when you cut off your raham, obviously you're going to save more money, because you have more time to do real paid work. But it's a negative thing, obviously. وَإِثَارَ الدُّنْيَا عَلَى الْآخِرَةِ. The fact that people favor this world over the hereafter, this is what accumulates wealth. So the key point we have to learn here is the scourge of our faith is loving this world. How do we get away from this, loving this wealth? This wealth that we love it, how do we leave this thing? It's very hard for us to sit there and not have this feeling. Firstly, like everything, we need to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this holy month, the month where dua is accepted, even for the brothers that continually do dua. For example, let's say there's a brother that does dua sabah every morning, okay? And every Thursday night he does dua kumayl. Fantastic, that's very good. However, you wouldn't eat burgers every day, would you? Because, you know, if first day, second day, third day, fifth day, you'll get over that food. You want a different food. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has supplied us with so many dua. So many different types of dua for different times. In Shahr Ramadan, let's take the opportunity to have that chance at reading dua Abi Hamza al-Thamali, for example. Listening and reading dua al-iftitah. Listening and reading to all the other ad'iyah that are out there, dua al-mujir, etc., etc., for this month and throughout the rest of the year. Having a look at Sahifat Sajadiyya, what are these ad'iyah about? These dua are the dua that you make. These supplications are the supplications that you make for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you this help in ridding yourself of the scourge of being too in love with this world, and especially with the love of wealth. That's the first thing. The second thing is the transience. In the verse in the Holy Quran that I read at the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks how the disbelievers are happy when the rain comes down and the plants grow, and they think, wow, fantastic. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and watch as these plants grow and then they wither away to nothing. That there's transience, that it's not going to stay forever. That's the worst part about it. It doesn't stay forever. So if you sit there and you accumulate this wealth and you hold on to it, what benefit is it to you? However, if you spend it, Amir al-Mu'mineen says that wealth never benefited anyone until it left his hand. Simple as that. It never had any benefit till it leaves his hand. That's the truth. When the wealth leaves our hand, we can get goods, etc. But the whole point is the love of this wealth. What's wrong with it is the fact that we just accumulate it, and on so many scales it's wrong. On the largest scale, it ruins economies and creates poverty. On a smaller scale, that it's just dead money sitting there and you're not doing anything with it. Now I'm not saying, I'm not encouraging people to come out and say, that's why I'm going to buy the car that I want. This is love of this world. This is why I'm going to spend $50,000 on a motorbike. That's love of this world. These things are also wrong. What it's supposed to do is make you feel that I need to spend money in the right places. I don't know how to read Quran, for example. I'm going to spend money to teach myself Quran. I'm going to hire a teacher. For example, I know that there is mosques and Islamic centers and etc. I'm going to put some of my wealth into these. This is an investment for my hereafter. I know there's orphans and poor people. I'm going to invest some money into this. This is what it's about. That rather than, for example, buying a $1,000 jacket, I'm going to buy a $300 jacket, and with some of that leftover money, say half of it, not all of it, I'm going to give it to the poor, or something like that. Putting your money in the right place and not having that love that you can't leave it. Remember that it's transient, that you're not going to take it with you, you're not going to keep it. There's a tradition where the Holy Prophet says to his companions, he's sitting with his companions, and he says to he says, أَيَّكُمْ مَالْ وَرَثِهِ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ مَالِهِ. He says, which of you loves the money of his inheritors more than he loves his own money? So they say, none of us, Ya Rasulullah, this is absurd. Nobody loves the money of his inheritors, the people that are going to inherit him, more than he loves his own money. And so Rasulullah says, no. بَلْ كُلُّكُمْ يُحِبُّ ذَلِكَ. And then he says, يَقُولُ ابْنُ آدَمْ. Rasulullah says that the son of Adam always says, مَالِي مَالِي. That it's my wealth, this is mine, my car, my house, my whatever, my jacket, my suit. That all of these things, we keep referring to them as mine and mine. And then he says, وَهَلْ لَكَ مِنْ مَالِكَ إِلَّا مَا أَكَلْتَ فَأَفْنَيْتَ. Is there anything of your wealth except what you eat and you disperse of? أَوْ لَبِسْتَ فَأَبْلَيْتَ أَوْ تَصَدَّقْتَ فَأَمْضَيْتَ وَمَا عَدَى ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ مَالِ الْوَارِثِ. That other than the food that you used to eat, or you pay in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the clothes that cover your back, all of the other wealth that you have is for the inheritor. So that whatever wealth that you hold aside, this is what it's for. It's going down the line. And then who knows what happens with it after that. Amir al-Mu'mineen has a nice tradition where he says that after this, it's either going to go to someone who's going to spend it on good. Sorry, he's going to spend it on enjoyment. He's going to enjoy himself with it. And you'll have none of that. Or it's going to go to somebody who's going to spend it in the wrong way. And you would have prepared this adventure for him. You would have prepared it by this large amount of wealth. Too many stories before we go through the stories of how many of this happens. People think put it all together for this. See, the issue is money, like every other object, but money is different. It has this possessive skill over us. It has this possessive attribute over us. That money, like all things, shouldn't supersede or shouldn't take over your religious goals in this life. Shouldn't take over your faith. Shouldn't take over your deen, your prayers on time, abstaining from sin, seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the core issue behind it. This is the core issue behind this, and the wealth is one of those things because it's deceptive. It really is deceptive. That you sit there and you have this feeling that it's going to remain forever. We look at Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We look at a beautiful story by Nabi Isa, or about Nabi Isa alayhi salam, ala nabiyina wa alihi wa alayhi salam, that this holy prophet, we see an example in his life that is such a great example that there's many examples like this in all of the lives of the prophets. However, this is one of those examples that's good. It has a very good moral. And so Nabi Isa alayhi salam is walking with a few of his companions, and you probably have heard this story. I don't want to bore the people that have already heard it, so I might cut and paste some of it. But the point is, Nabi Isa alayhi salam is walking with some of his companions, and they come across a treasure. So his companions leave him immediately. They sit there and they start thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to halve it up? I'll take a third, you take a third, you take a third. There was 3 of them. And then they think, yeah, okay, third, but how are we going to cut up the third? We're going to have to measure it out. We're going to have to work out how we're going to carry it away from this place, etc. So Nabi Isa alayhi salam says to them, I'm going to bring you a real treasure and I'll come back. You have come and you've seen this gold and the brightness of this gold and thought you've found something that's great. I'm going to go bring you a real treasure and I'll come back and show you. So he walks and goes into the next town. They say that this story takes place outside the land of Antioch, where the Holy Prophet sends, Nabi Isa alayhi salam sends 3 of those prophets that get killed in Antioch, which is, I think, in modern day Syria. And so Nabi Isa alayhi salam enters a shanty town, a poor town. Obviously, most towns were built around a king's castle or palace. And so he walks into the poor town and he finds a small dwelling. In the dwelling, there's a lady. She welcomes him in, an old lady. She says, you can sleep here. My son will be home soon. And when he gets home, he'll be at your service. So Nabi Isa alayhi salam walks in and waits. The son comes home. He sees Nabi Isa alayhi salam and he says to him, take a seat, join us. They bring bread. And the mother says, look after him because he has the look of piety. He has a bright face. He looks like somebody who has a special position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they didn't know who he was. Just like a standard mu'min to them. So the young boy sits down with him and they get bread, they break the bread, they eat the bread. But the whole time this guy seems depressed. So Nabi Isa alayhi salam looks at him and says, what's wrong with you? And he says, what's wrong with me? Even if I tell you what's wrong with me, you're a beggar. You've just walked into our house, you've got nothing, and I'm helping you out. How do you think you can help me out with my depression? And Nabi Isa alayhi salam says, tell me. He says, me, I work all day, every day, to get enough for 2 loaves of bread. I come home, me and my mum share these 2 loaves of bread. No future, I don't see any future for myself. He says, but one day as I was walking past the palace, and I looked up towards the palace, and on one of the patios or the verandas of the palace, I saw the king's daughter. And she was drop dead gorgeous. No scarf, everything's, and he got so excited that he said, I must have this girl. There's no other girl for me, it's her. So he says to Nabi Isa, I want this girl. And Nabi Isa says, no worries, we can have it arranged. So the youth looks at him and says, why are you mocking me? Why are you mocking me? You're going to arrange it? I'm a peasant, I'm a nobody. And think about it, even to this day, the daughter of a king gets married to the son of a king. There's no 2 ways about it, no matter how rich you are. So the point is, or so we think, the point is Nabi Isa alayhi salam then tells him, tomorrow you go up to the palace and you walk up to the king and tell him, I want to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. And the guy says, there's no way they're even going to let me enter the palace. They're not going to even let me enter. So Nabi Isa says, just go in and tell them this, and inshallah it'll work out. So the boy builds up as much courage as he can. The youth builds up as much courage as he can, and he goes up to the castle, and obviously at the gates there's guards. So he walks up and the guard looks at him and says, what do you want, peasant? What are you doing here? So the guy says, I have an appointment with the king. And the guard looks at him and says, I don't think so. The king is standing on one of the verandas and he sees him. And he says, let him in. What's a peasant doing knocking on the front of the castle? It's got to be something. So he lets him in. He comes in and he says to the peasant, you said you have an appointment with me. What's it about? And he says, I want to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. So they have a bit of a giggle. They have a bit of a laugh. The king and all his advisors are around him, the ministers and the advisors. And he says to him, you know what? If you want my daughter, see this jewel. He was wearing a crown and he had a beautiful jewel. They say this jewel was so beautiful and bright that even in the middle of the night it would glow. A huge ruby or diamond or something. So he says, get me one of these and come back and I'll give you my daughter. No, sorry. He goes, get me one of these and come back and we'll talk. So he says to him, one of those, like it's going to be very hard for me to get one of those. And then the king says, you know what? Either get me one of those or get me as much as a camel can hold treasure. Like with the 2 saddlebags on the side, how much gold and jewels can it hold? That's what I want. And in that day and age, that amount of wealth you're talking was, the income of probably the king's whole kingdom. That's how much wealth that would have been. Think about it. These peasants are living off just bread. They don't even talk about gold coins. It's only the noblemen, etc. So imagine 2 massive saddle packs of jewels. So this guy goes back really upset and he walks in and he sees Nabi Isa alayhi salam, obviously not knowing who he is. And he says to him that, why did you do this to me? You embarrassed me. I went in, I looked like an idiot. The king told me get this and you made it so difficult for me. And so Nabi Isa says, what did he ask for? He said he asked for 2 saddlebags of wealth, of jewels. So they say in some narrations, Nabi Isa picked up a pile of dirt and in his hand it transformed to gold and jewels. And then he pointed at one of the walls and it just became gold and jewels. This guy was shocked. So he filled up as much as he could and he ran straight back to the king's palace. So they saw him holding a sack and they're thinking this is some sort of a joke. They let him in, he opens it, he shows it to the king is shocked. He says, this is some of what I told you to get, but I'm shocked where you got it from anyway. But we said that we want you to get us 2 saddlebags full, so go get the rest. So he gets the rest. When he comes back, they're not going to let it go. Some poor guy comes up with all the jewels. Where did you get it from? And so he says, this man came into our house. He was barefoot. He was wearing tattered clothes. This is all he ate. So the ministers around said, this is Nabi Isa. This is the Messiah that he's speaking about. We've read about it in our books and we know who this Messiah is. And so he tells him, bring the Messiah. So he brings Jesus to the castle, Nabi Isa alayhi salam to the castle with him. And the king says, he tells his ministers, is there any way out of this? Can I sort of, change the rules? They say, no, you've given your word, your word's your word. So he agrees to let this guy marry his daughter. So that night they arrange for him to marry the princess, and the king takes the wealth, and the king then realizes he has no sons, so he says, I will pass the kingship onto you, that you will be the heir to the throne. So this guy is to become the next king. He gets married, they have their festival of marriage. That night he gets married, the next day the king dies. So then he becomes the king. Married to a gorgeous princess, everything is fine. Everything is good. Then he speaks to Nabi Isa and he says, hold on a minute. Like, this is all fine and dandy. But if this is good, why don't you do it for yourself? If you can point at a wall and make it into gold, why don't you do it for yourself? Why would you do it for me? And Nabi Isa alayhi salam says to him, no, it's not bad. It's good if you use it for good. But he says, but you, why wouldn't you do it for yourself? That's what I don't understand. When people speak about the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, this Holy Prophet who had the command of the world, but yet what did he do? He used to sit on the floor. He used to lick his fingers after he ate. He used to say salam to everybody that comes near him. If anybody asked him for anything, he would never refuse them. He would go out of his way. Never would he act haughty in front of anyone. He was the most humble of humble. In fact, they would say, why does your prophet sit like a servant? Why does he sit like a abd? And he says, this is because I am a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this holy prophet gets these accusations, or people turn around and say, oh, this is just fairy tales. Fairy tales of this man who had this command, yet why didn't he live in a huge palace? Explain that to me. Why didn't he have a massive yacht? Why didn't he tell the people, bring me your finest maidens, this is all I want? Why didn't he just gather all the gold? Why don't we have till today, this is the castle of, the Holy Prophet? Or, as we have the castle of the King Henry the X, and King Louis' palace in Paris and whatever. Why do we have these palaces and castles, these remnants that they left? But there's nothing like that about our Holy Prophet. Because of the life and the way the Holy Prophet lived, however, the message and strength of the message of Islam lived on. When we look at the story with Nabi Isa alayhi salam, when he asks him that, Nabi Isa tells him the same thing. He says to him that this is good and you can live like this, but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for me is even better. For me, all of these worldly things are nothing compared to me just being in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have tasted a sweetness that you haven't tasted yet, that you don't understand. So this man says, this is what I want. If you have the ability to hold dirt and turn it into jewels, and you don't want this, then I don't want this, I want what it is that you want. So he leaves everything to his wife, and he leaves his wife and leaves the kingdom and follows Nabi Isa alayhi salam. And Nabi Isa returns to find 3 dead bodies with the treasure, and he was about to show them the true treasure that he had accumulated. My brothers and sisters, the most important thing about tonight, and we're completely out of time, but the most important thing for us to learn is that money isn't everything. And the wealth that we accumulate isn't everything. And we have too many examples around us without me even beginning to speak about these examples. How many a builder of a house never gets to live in his house, or a builder of a yacht never gets to enter his yacht, etc., etc. Or the purchaser of a luxury vehicle never gets to drive his luxury vehicle. And once he leaves, that wealth remains. So take this opportunity now, especially in this holy month. Of poor needy people, give money. Help initiate and upkeep Islamic centers and mosques with your money, with your wealth. Because this thing remains. Nothing else remains. You can't guarantee what your offspring will be, or if you will even get to have an offspring. So we need to understand and look that this world is passing. Take the initiative, seize the moment and the opportunity. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us in the same way that He guides the righteous of His servants, and to help us against our lower selves in the same way that He helps His righteous servants against their lower selves. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the Holy Imam, Aljaafaria Sharif, wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة وأهدى ثوابها إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات تصفيق الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.